From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Just days after the Artemis II astronauts returned to Earth, we've got a different lunar exploration story today, one that hasn't gotten as much attention. Scientists have known for years that the moon holds traces of water. That water could be invaluable for future space exploration as ingredients for rocket fuel, or perhaps by one day providing water for a colony on the moon. But exactly where that water is remains something of a mystery. A new study led by University of Colorado researchers is helping to solve part of that mystery by pinpointing where frozen water might be. Paul Hain is a planetary scientist at CU Boulder's Laboratory of Atmospheric and Space Physics. He's part of a team that published their findings earlier this month in the journal Nature Astronomy. Paul is here to help explain what we know about the moon's hidden water, how his work ties into NASA's Artemis program, and how the research might one day help establish a base on the moon.
If you pick any random place on the moon and look at how much water exists there, it would be drier than the driest desert you could find on Earth. And so the surprising discovery over the last 10 to 20 years has been that there is water on the moon in very special locations. And those locations are close to the poles of the moon, where we find deep, dark shadows where the sun literally never shines, that are created by a combination of the moon's special orbit around Earth and the topography, the presence of craters on the lunar surface. And so you get these shadows that have persisted for billions of years, where temperatures are cold enough to trap water as ice.
And how does water on the moon create opportunities for future space explorers?
Water is an extremely valuable resource, both here on Earth and in space. And it is very expensive to transfer water from Earth to space. And this is an opportunity then to look at ways for potentially extracting water from other locations out in space. And it turns out that the moon is one of the best places to try this out. So if we can find places on the moon that have water at high enough concentrations to be useful, then we could save a lot of money and be more efficient in our space exploration by extracting and utilizing the water on the lunar surface.
When I see images of the surface of the moon, it all looks pretty dry. How do you search for water, and what exactly are you looking for?
We search for water using remote sensing. So this is using satellites with instrumentation that has been designed to search for water. The main spacecraft that we have used up to this point over the last 15 years is NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter spacecraft. And I'm a part of that science team. And we've used data from the Diviner instrument, which looks for places that are cold enough for water to exist at the lunar poles. And then we also use remote sensing data in the form of spectroscopy. So we look for the color variations at wavelengths that are not visible to the human eye, but have very, detectable fingerprints or signatures for water compared to the dry lunar surface. And so we can find places that have that signature inside those shadows in the cold areas and say, this is a good place to search for water. We see hints of water in these locations. Through our research, we found that this implies that the moon has been collecting water throughout its history. So it wasn't just one big comet impact that delivered water all of a sudden, but instead was probably a continuous delivery of water over time.
For this recent research, you sort of rewound the moon's history using computer simulations to look back at how the surface of the moon changed over millions of years. What did you learn by doing that?
Yeah, so we looked back in time at how the sunlight and shadow has changed over billions of years at the poles of the moon. By rewinding the clock and looking at the history of sunlight and shadow at the poles of the moon, we found that the places that have been in shadow the longest have the most ice.
We are talking just a few days after the Artemis II mission circled the moon last week. I'm curious if you'll learn anything from Artemis about water on the moon.
Artemis is a long-term program with a goal of establishing a sustainable presence of humans on the lunar surface. So Artemis II is a very exciting first step in the Artemis program, which will eventually establish kind of a scientific research station at the south pole of the moon. And so one of the main science goals of Artemis is to locate and study the ice that may exist in these craters. And so I'm very excited to see what we learn from Artemis II and the following missions. And as part of the science team for the first surface mission, I'm looking forward to providing input on where to go and where to find that ice. From Artemis II, we also are using data that the astronauts collected during their lunar flyby to better understand the moon and the space environment. They observed impact flashes on the night side of the moon that show meteorites hitting the surface and producing a flash that tells us about how big those projectiles were. That type of event occurs on Earth too, but we see them as shooting stars in our night sky. So tracking those impacts is something that we're very interested in, among other things that we'll learn from Artemis II.
I know you just learned you'll be a part of the science team for that next Artemis launch, so that's exciting. Look forward a few decades. What do you hope your search for water on the moon helps us accomplish as space explorers?
I hope that water on the moon gives a focused scientific purpose for the Artemis missions. I think this is an incredibly valuable record of solar system history, and it's really unique, and it's right in our backyard. I think Artemis is an opportunity to fulfill some of the dreams of early planetary scientists and astronomers about understanding how our solar system came to be and our place in it.
And how do you think your work looking for water on the moon might help human space explorers get to Mars and other planets?
A lot of the exploration that we will do at the moon and Mars depends on water, not just for drinking water for the astronauts, but also for rocket fuel and for watering plants. If you think of Mark Watney and his potatoes, this is obviously one of the key ingredients for life. And so we need water wherever we go. And so learning how to extract and use it in a sustainable way on the moon will help us to use similar techniques on Mars and beyond.
Think of The Martian, Mark Watney.
Right, exactly.
Paul Hain is a planetary scientist at the University of Colorado Boulder. He's part of a research team studying where to find water on the moon. We'll have links where you can learn more about his research in our show notes and at KUNC.org. That's it today for In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.